say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the
Greetings from your United States Air Force Academy. I'm Lieutenant General Retired Mike Gould, a member of the proud class of 1976 and the individual fortunate enough to have served as the 18th Superintendent of USAFA. Today, I'm the CEO of the Association of Graduates and the Air Force Academy Foundation. As a fellow member of the Long Blue Line, I want to welcome family, friends, and classmates who have joined us for this year's first ever virtual Next of Kin Memorial Ceremony. In a normal year, we'd be gathered together on the terrazzo with all 4,000 cadets for a more personal memorial ceremony in honor of your loved ones. But due to the realities of the global pandemic, we're not able to meet face-to-face to offer our most sincere condolences in person. We've had to pivot to a backup plan, but we hope this online version of the Next of Kin ceremony will still be meaningful and encouraging to those of you viewing from home or stationed around the globe. During this ceremony, we're going to recognize a total of 144 Academy graduates and former air training officers who passed away during the past year. Honoring our fallen comrades has become a significant tradition for the Air Force Academy family each year, and this year is no exception. Over the next few minutes, we'll be remembering each of your loved ones and the many contributions they made at USAFA, in the Air Force, and throughout our nation. Please know that the Long Blue Line continues to stand behind you and your family during this time. And as always, don't ever hesitate to reach out if there is anything we can do to support you. Thank you for attending, and let's begin the ceremony.
Please prepare a glass for a toast that will be given at the conclusion of the ceremony. Now, join us as we read each name of our fallen comrades, to honor those who have passed over the last year. Graduate names will be read in the order of date of passing, with ATO names read at the conclusion of the squadrons.
Lee N. Peniston, Class of 1961. Colonel Retired Ronald J. Whedon, Class of 1961. Lieutenant Colonel Retired Michael T. Reich, Class of 1971.
Absent, sir.
Captain Trinae L. Tanner, Class of 2012. Lieutenant Colonel Retired Philip R. Smotherman, Class of 1959. Major Retired Richard H. Smith, Class of 1968. Lieutenant Colonel Retired Stephen W. Tibbetts, Class of 1975. Captain retired Christopher R. Kopf, class of 1966. Major retired John H. Miltner, class of 1959.
Absent, sir.
Major General retired Lawrence E. Day, class of 1963. Louis G. Benham, class of 1965. David R. Senachek, class of 1979. Lieutenant Colonel retired James P. Hogarty, class of 1967. Colonel retired Thomas Arco, class of 1981. Lieutenant Colonel retired Harold G. Keck, class of 1962.
Absent, sir.
David H. Rollins, class of 1965. Captain James L. Spidel, class of 2011. Lieutenant Colonel retired John W. Heidi, class of 1963.
Absent, sir.
Thomas C. Sirochin, Jr., class of 1995. Second Lieutenant Travis B. Wilkie, class of 2018. Lieutenant Colonel retired John J. Evans, class of 1978. James C. Vance, class of 1959. Major retired Thomas J. Joswiak, class of 1959. Colonel retired James R. Blackwell, class of 1959. William H. Gold, class of 1959. Colonel retired Edward S. Tooley, class of 1966. Charles S. Rogers, class of 1959. Colonel retired Stephen K. Weart, class of 1979.
Absent, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel retired Roy R. Kilgore, class of 1965. Lieutenant Colonel retired Andre J. Kavork, class of 1978. Lieutenant Colonel retired Richard L. Nash, class of 1971.
Absent, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel retired James C. Welch, class of 1959. Cadet First Class William L. Billy Gorsinski, class of 2020.
Absent, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel retired Harry G. Patton III, class of 1962. James L. Skrabeck, class of 1971. Colonel retired Robert K. Selke, class of 1967. Colonel retired Royce G. Woodell, class of 1967. Robert L. McDonough, class of 1962. Cadet First Class Joseph E. Thornton, class of 2020.
Absent, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel Matthew P. Platt, class of 2003. Lieutenant Colonel retired John E. Murray, class of 1964. Lieutenant Colonel retired Roger L. Counts, class of 1959.
Absent, sir.
Major retired Bernard W. Johnston, class of 1962.
Absent, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel retired Glenn C. Stowe, class of 1977. Lieutenant Colonel retired Gilbert J. Actor, class of 1964. Lieutenant Colonel retired Jeffrey R. Hamlin, class of 1969. Colonel retired Ross A. Miles, class of 1974. Lieutenant Colonel retired Richard M. Kopic, class of 1961. Bruce S. Bob Marks, class of 1968. Major retired Raymond R. Honecker, class of 1969. Stephen J. Savanen, class of 1963.
Absent, sir.
Brendan P. Mickis, class of 1988. Darrell G. Maston, class of 1976. Colonel retired Jerome W. Jerry Berg, class of 1972. Gary W. Cox, class of 1975. Don A. Keener, class of 1978. Lieutenant Colonel retired Harrison E. P. King, class of 1960.
Absent, sir.
Jesse B. Ash III, class of 1986. Stephen R. Sitcher, class of 1989.
Absent, sir.
Colonel retired Gary C. Reiser, class of 1964. Lieutenant Colonel retired Dean H. Haylett, class of 1973. Major retired James W. Clark, Jr., class of 1960. Lieutenant Colonel retired Athos E. Gillett, class of 1960.
Absent, sir. Shelley A. Gwillem Allen, class of 1986. Captain retired Willard T. Burney, class of 1965. Donald R. Vaughn, class of 1966. Lieutenant Colonel retired John L. Bowles, Jr., class of 1964. George J. Skip Pepe, class of 1971. Absent, sir. William F. Brown, class of 1968. Patrick R. Flanagan, class of 1976. Lieutenant Colonel retired Charles R. Waterman, Jr., class of 1960. Colonel retired Dwight E. Clark, class of 1969. Colonel retired Robert G. Lambert, class of 1965. Absent, sir. Obie T. Atkinson, class of 1967. Colonel retired Joseph J. Cox, class of 1963. James T. Dolan, class of 1976. Colonel retired Rodney A. Wells, class of 1964. Lieutenant Colonel retired Harold G. Reiner, class of 1965. Lieutenant Colonel retired Douglas A. McCarty, class of 1985. Colonel retired David I. Devoren, class of 1963. Absent, sir. Lieutenant Colonel retired Edward Berberick, Jr., class of 1965. Wiley C. Hendrickson, class of 1967. Major General retired Richard D. Smith, class of 1961. David A. Imler, class of 1967. Colonel retired. James D. Doug Marlowe, class of 1977. Major retired. Robert M. Gray, class of 1976. Lieutenant Colonel retired. Peter T. McInerney, Jr., class of 1965. Absent, sir.
Colonel Ronald E. Eric Gilbert, class of 1998. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Morales, class of 1999.
Absent, sir.
Brendan A. Hannafy, class of 1965. Major retired Gary R. Rockefeller, class of 1966. John J. Rankin, class of 1970. Lieutenant Colonel retired Paul R. Stephen, class of 1961. Dennis D. Dillon, class of 1961.
Absent, sir.
Major General retired Lee A. Downer, class of 1964. Anthony H. Taylor, class of 1964. Lieutenant Colonel Mark J. Smith, class of 1995. Colonel retired Robert L. Rain, class of 1966. Joseph E. Wade, class of 1970.
Absent, sir.
Eldon R. Lindstrom, class of 1974. Stanley H. Burgess II, class of 1968. Lieutenant Colonel retired Eduardo C. Maidunas, class of 1996. Lieutenant Colonel retired Carl J. Chuck Vogel, class of 1966. Christopher S. Simpson, class of 1987. Major Robert M. Whitney, class of 2008.
Absent, sir.
Major General retired George W. Larson, Jr., class of 1962.
Absent, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel retired Dustin H. Swanson, Jr., class of 1970. James M. Capello, class of 1968. Scott D. Allen, class of 1979.
Absent, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel retired John W. Southmedlin, class of 1971. David B. Hood, class of 1979. Colonel retired Christopher G. Scharenbrock, class of 1988. John E. Robluski, class of 1971. Tam P. Foe, class of 1987.
Absent, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel retired Eric J. Kleiner, class of 1969. Colonel retired James A. Drake, class of 1977. Lieutenant Colonel retired Peter J. Cohen, class of 1992.
Absent, sir.
Colonel retired John D. Jogerst, class of 1979. Gary A. Held, class of 1975. Patrick G. Rooney, class of 1972.
Absent, sir.
Captain Ryan S. Gibson, class of 2010. Major retired Thomas E. Cana, class of 1978. Colonel Thomas G. Falzarano, class of 1994.
Absent, sir.
Richard B. Doyle, class of 1969. Lieutenant Colonel, retired, Michael D. Kaufman, class of 1973.
Absent, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel, retired, Kevin M. Keith, class of 1991. Major Matthew J. Berzoner, class of 2007. Major, retired, Roderick M. Williams, class of 1976.
Absent, sir.
Major, retired, Walter F. Hearn, class of 1977. Captain Andrew J. Chahomsky, class of 2014. Ronald Vickroy, class of 1971.
Absent, sir.
First Lieutenant Kenneth G. Cage Allen, class of 2017.
Absent, sir.
Second Lieutenant Vito Antonio H. Valenzuela, class of 2019. Gary R. Matson, class of 1975.
Absent, sir.
Colonel, retired, John L. Bush, class of 1972.
Absent, sir.
Paul A. Emanuel, class of 1974.
Absent, sir.
Nicholas W. Finney. Lieutenant Colonel retired, William T. Adams. Lieutenant Colonel retired, Charles F. Emmons. Frank S. Wilkerson. Colonel retired, Susan M. Wright. Colonel retired, William A. Fredland. Kimbrough S. Bassett.
Absent, sir.
Hello, I'm Chaplain Holly Jones, and I invite you to join me for a moment of silence in honor of our 144 United States Air Force Academy graduates that we lost this past year. I invite you to join me for prayer as your faith allows. Eternal God, I thank you for this opportunity to honor and celebrate the life and legacy of our graduates. Today we approach your throne of grace with united hearts and minds, for we join together near and far to pay tribute to the 144 Air Force Academy grads we've lost this past year. Lord, they were more than airmen and officers. They were grandparents, parents, spouses, siblings, and friends. The legacy they now leave behind will go beyond the long blue line, for they will live on in their families, as well as the Air Force families they tirelessly poured into. May we live to honor their memory and their legacy. Now, Lord, I ask that you continue to bless the loved ones of those whom we honor today. Grant them your spirit of peace and supernatural hope. And while no two people grieve the same, I ask that you be ever near them. Give the families comfort and strength during this time, and may we honor the graduates, and may they rest well with you. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in raising your glass in honor of our fallen comrades. They and their families sacrificed much in service to our nation. May God welcome our fallen comrades in eternity and comfort and care for their families with the warmth of His grace and our undying gratitude. Hear, hear.